Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Rogue Agent Answers. My name is the Rogue Agent. Some people call me David Lewis, and every week I answer one of the many life insurance related questions that I've received from clients, from email subscribers on the daily email list. Questions floated to me from across the interwebs, in the comments sections, which I know you're not supposed to read, or just interactions that I've had with people in real life over the past 20 years, which is a long time. And some of these questions I just scribble down on scrap pieces of paper. Some of these are stuff I've written down on my phone. Some of it is on Post-it notes scattered all over the office. And every week I answer one of those questions. So if you'd like to ask your question, drop them in the comments section or join my email list for more life insurance tips and advice at therogueagent.com. Also, keep in mind that nothing in this podcast is or should be construed as financial investment, legal, or tax advice. In fact, nothing that I say in this podcast should be construed even as insurance advice, as I don't give individual advice blanket just across the internet unqualified to random strangers. So if you need any of that stuff, contact a licensed professional that you know, like, and trust, preferably someone licensed in your jurisdiction. And now for this week's question. Oh, question. You said that rate of return on my policy doesn't matter much. Why do you say that? I know it sounds like kind of stupid, right? Okay. So the reason I say that is because the point of your policy isn't to replace, is not, right? So I'm clear. The point of your policy is not to replace your investments, or even to serve as an alternative investment. I know the Innernet is divided on this issue, and there's a lot of people who have contacted me over the years, some of them agents, some of them not agents, some of them lawyers. Some folks believe it is a terrible investment. I suspect that a lot of the people that continue to listen to these Q&As don't think that, but some people do. The other side of this debate argues that it's a great investment, and I've heard that from agents too. My position on this is that it's not really an investment. Legally, it's not an investment. Okay, we sort of, part of this regulatory compliance thing is you don't call life insurance an investment, and a lot of agents if you're being very conservative as an agent, you'd say, yeah, it's life insurance is not an investment. In the old days, in the 1920s, 1930s, they did call it an investment. They said life insurance is a great investment. You should do this. You can put money in here. People got confused because it didn't function the same way that an investment functioned, like an equity investment. So when things don't function like they're supposed to, or like the way that you would expect them to, then people get upset. People get the wrong ideas about, hey, I thought you said this was an investment. Why isn't it returning the same kinds of returns that a stock market, equity market investment might return? So then, lawsuits ensue, and there's, some misrepresentation. The reality is, if you look at the way the product is designed, and you look at the way the product performs over decades, not over like 1 or 2 years, but over decades, the product has some characteristics that make it function or that perform in a way similar to what you might consider to be an investment. It has, a lot of people in the insurance business say, like, yeah, it has an investment component to it. That's the cash surrender value. It produces a return over long periods of time. You should earn a stable return. I've had people within the industry. We don't hear this from people that are talking to the general public, but I'm saying people in the industry. Go to industry conferences, you talk to people, actuaries, you talk to product designers, the guys they don't sell insurance, they design the products. Those people often refer to it as an investment or having an investment component embedded within the policy. And they will often compare it to like a bond fund or something similar to that, right? Agents will never do that because of, I guess, just strictly compliance reasons. But everybody kind of knows that, it functions there's an element of it that functions like an investment. But that's not all. I think if the only way that you thought about it was an investment, you're sort of cheapening the product, because it's not doesn't just, like with whole life insurance, for example, it's not just the rate of return on cash surrender value. The product is insurance. It functions like insurance because it is insurance. It has a death benefit. When you die, your beneficiaries receive a real cash benefit. They get a benefit that is impossible to replicate with any other financial product. You can't get this with anything else. Mutual funds don't replicate this. Stocks don't replicate this. Bonds do not replicate this. If you become, let's say, permanently disabled, like you suffer a stroke and you can't take care of yourself, you develop Alzheimer's disease or dementia of some kind, and you can no longer take care of yourself. On many of these policies, there is a provision that allows you to start advancing the death benefit, spending the death benefit, and effectively creating old age insurance, similar to something that would be similar to long-term care insurance. But old age insurance, they call it a chronic illness insurance. So if you have a chronic illness where you cannot take care of yourself, then that you can start spending the death benefit. That, again, a benefit that does not happen you don't get this from equity investments. You don't get it from what you would consider to be more traditional investments. So it is, and it does function like insurance, okay? It does do the things that insurance does, which means it makes you whole for a loss. It makes your beneficiaries whole for a loss. If you die or when you die, the policy pays a cash benefit to make your beneficiaries whole for the loss of your life. If you lose your income or you lose the ability to take care of yourself, you are made whole for that loss through these living benefits on the policy. The policy does what insurance is supposed to do. In other words, it is a hedge against financial risk. The cash surrender value, the fact that the cash surrender value grows at a relatively predictable rate is, again, another hedge against financial risk that would either prevent you from accumulating the amount of money that you would otherwise be able to accumulate, or hedge against losses that you might incur on a non-guaranteed investment. It doesn't erase the losses. It doesn't make it so that you don't lose money. It's not making you whole for an investment loss, but it acts as a hedge so that you have like a safety net, something that is there that you can't lose. And again, that is functioning as insurance. And so I think that if you're going to look at this as a whole product, you look at it as really a giant financial safety net, again, which is what insurance does. The fact that it has a rate of return is part of the bigger picture. It's not the whole thing. So that's why I say that rate of return on policy, it matters, but it doesn't matter as much as I think a lot of people let me put it this way. A lot of people place a lot of weight on what's the rate of return on the policy, and either completely ignore or just really severely discount the other benefits of the policy. So the main point of the life insurance policy is it's there to financially protect you against uncertainty. It's there to provide you with money when you need it, to protect your family when you die, to protect you if you become terminally or chronically ill. It protects your savings. It gives you some kind of assurance of financial security in the future, which is something that investments, no matter how good they are, can never do. Does it have a good rate of return? On some policies, yeah, it has a great rate of return for its risk category. It has a good rate of return, relative, let's say, to other fixed income investments, but it's not its main feature. I mean, a lot of people do treat it as the main feature because that's why they bought it. When you're young, you care a lot about that. You get older, you start thinking about maybe some of the other things that you might need it for. Sometimes when you get older, you do still think about the cash value because it's going to help supplement, your other savings, if and when you retire. Its main feature is financial security, though. That's what it does. Think of it as a financial foundation. The bigger the foundation, the more you can protect and the more financial security you can have. And in fact, this is really one reason why agents review your insurance coverage periodically. The more money that you make, the more assets that you accumulate, the more you have to lose. And thus the more life insurance that, will benefit you and your family. When you don't have a lot to lose, you can get away with buying, let's say term insurance or maybe just a smaller amount of insurance. But the more assets you accumulate, the more you have to lose. the more you have to protect. I mean, it's like any other type of insurance. When you have a small house, you buy a small homeownership policy. If you have a business and let's say you're theoretically your liability maybe maxes out at $1 million or something, maybe you buy $1 million business insurance policy. But if you run a large company and you make $10 million a year or $50 million a year or something like that, or 100 million, I mean, a really small or medium-sized business, right? So if you're making, decent amount of money, revenue that's coming in, you're not going to want $1 million liability policy. You want your liability policy to be much, much bigger. So the more you have to lose, the bigger your assets, the more valuable the things that you have, the more insurance you want. There's the more protection that you are probably, I mean, at least in my heretical opinion, the more valuable your stuff is, the more stuff you have, the more things you have to lose, the more insurance that you should. If you're a rational person who cares about the things in his life, the more insurance you're going to want. So I hope that answers the question. Moving on. So the next one is, should I be borrowing against my policy to buy real estate stocks or something else? Well, I cannot recommend that you borrow against your policy to make any kind of investment. That's not the business I'm in. It's not really the type of advice I give. I'm not licensed to give that, but even if I was, it's not really something that I would say, yeah, you should do this. I mean, I think that would be kind of irresponsible, honestly. I don't know how other financial advisors do it, but personally, there's a certain thing is, should I buy this or that in terms of an investment? I think it's a very difficult question to answer. And one that when I've heard other people try to answer this question, especially financial advisors even, it's very rare that I hear a really good answer to that. It's much easier to answer a question of should I protect this asset that I own? And the answer to that is, well, if you value the asset, determine how much it's worth and then insure it for that amount. So if you don't value it at all, don't buy any insurance. If you do value it, how much do you value it? It's a little bit trickier when you're talking about what is this a good investment, a bad investment? Because a lot of that depends on the skill level of the investor. How long you're going to hold it? Do you know what you're doing with this thing? How much experience do you have investing in this thing? There's a lot of different questions you have to answer before you can answer that question. So I don't answer those kinds of questions. Anyway, what I can tell you, the benefits of and the risks of leveraging your life insurance policy for investment purposes. So leverage always and everywhere amplifies risk. People say it amplifies returns. It amplifies risk. Risk is always about the risk of losing money. Nobody ever talks about the risk of making money because, frankly, that's absurd. It's always the risk that you're going to lose. And borrowing against your life insurance policy means that you are risking your cash value. So you might lose them if the investment goes sideways on you. So that's the bad part. The good part is if the investment goes well, right? You can potentially make far more money than if you had not leveraged your life insurance policy. And I think that's where that question comes from. Is people thinking can I make more outside of my policy? Maybe. It doesn't mean that you always will lose money or that you always will make money. It just depends. Could you? Sure. Could you lose a lot? Sure. The risk and the volatility, especially volatility, as that goes up, it increases the odds of something happening. Increased volatility also increases the odds of you making more money. It can cut both ways. I mean, it could also increase the risk of you losing money, but it also increases the odds that you're going to make some money. You take the good with the bad. So I'd say if you're going to borrow money against your life insurance to make investments, you should have a really, really good grasp of what you're investing in. I personally wouldn't invest my cash values on someone else's stock tip or someone else's mutual fund recommendation or some kind of harebrained scheme. Some talking head on CNBC was promoting. I wouldn't do that. I mean, that'd be crazy. If I'm going to invest in something, I want to know it pretty well. Reasonably well anyway, enough to invest in it. And it was something that I also want to invest in something that I believe that I could manage well, to make a lot of money with it. That's how I approach that. If you can't say the same, if you don't, just not sure where to start, it doesn't mean that you can't eventually do it. But I would say, know what you're doing before you do it. Don't try to fumble around and figure it out especially with large sums of money. If you're going to do it with small amounts of money and don't risk your life insurance, which is your safe money. So anyway, that's my take on it. I hope that answers the question, and keep them coming, and I will see you in the next one.
Okay, that's it for this week's question. If you'd like to add your question to the list,
just drop them in the comment section or send me an email. And if you want more life insurance tips and advice, just head on over to therogueagent.com and sign up for my daily email list.